It was a Saturday morning in late May 2021 when everything started to unravel. The sun blazed over Scottsdale, Arizona, casting long, harsh shadows across the sleek, polished rows of cars in the lot outside my dealership. The heat was already creeping up to the 100-degree mark, but I wasn't bothered by it. I was used to it. I was used to everything. I'm Jake Sullivan, the owner of Sullivan's Luxury Motors. I've been running this business for the past 7 years, and things were going better than I could have ever imagined. My dream of owning a high-end car dealership had come true. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bentleys. If it roared down the highway or turned heads at every stoplight, it was ours to sell. My passion for cars had turned into a lucrative career. My customers loved me for my knowledge, my honesty, and my straightforward attitude. But it wasn't just the cars that kept me going. It was my wife, Tina, my beautiful, ambitious, loving wife. Tina had always been the one who kept me grounded, the one who made sure I didn't get lost in the world of luxury and steel. We'd met in college. She was studying marketing, and I was working at a garage, fixing up cars. We were both trying to figure things out, but we clicked. It didn't take long for us to start dating, and a few years later, we were married. When the business took off, Tina was right there by my side, helping with the marketing and the social media, always pushing me to be better. She had an eye for detail, and I needed that. We complemented each other perfectly. But lately, I'd started to feel like something was off. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on at first. Maybe it was the long hours at the dealership. Maybe it was the stress of managing a business that was growing faster than I could keep up with. Or maybe it was just life. Life has a way of making you think everything's fine until it isn't. Tina had been distant lately. Not in an obvious way, but in subtle ways. She'd come to the dealership, but she seemed distracted, talking less, avoiding eye contact, disappearing for longer periods of time. At first, I chalked it up to work. I'd seen her struggle to balance running our house and helping with the business. But after a while, I started to notice something else. She'd get these random text messages, always quick and quiet. If I walked into the room, she'd quickly lock her phone or turn the screen down. She wasn't the type to hide things from me. Tina had always been upfront, sometimes even too blunt. But there was this shift, a change that was subtle, but enough to make me uneasy. I tried to ignore it. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I had a lot on my plate, deals to close, cars to sell. But it wasn't just work keeping me distracted. There was Darren Green. Darren was one of my regular customers, a guy in his mid-40s with a casual confidence that made him seem like he owned the place every time he walked in. He wasn't flashy, but there was something about him that oozed wealth, even if he drove a modest silver Audi Q7 most of the time. I first met him about 2 years ago when he came in to buy a 2020 Porsche 911 Turbo S. We hit it off right away. He wasn't the typical high-maintenance customer. He asked the right questions, listened to my advice, and made decisions quickly. He paid cash, no questions asked, and left with a smile. We developed a friendship over the months, with Darren upgrading to an even flashier 2021 Ferrari F8 Tributo after the Porsche. He was loyal. He didn't go anywhere else, and he trusted me with his business. But there was something else about Darren that made me uneasy. It wasn't just that he was a regular. It was how he interacted with Tina. She was always friendly to my customers, but with Darren, there was something extra, an energy between them that I couldn't ignore. Tina would laugh at his jokes, playfully teasing him about his choice of car or asking him how the Ferrari was treating him. And he'd smile in that way that made you wonder if there was something more going on under the surface. Maybe it was all in my head. After all, Tina was friendly with a lot of my clients. But with Darren, there was something different. I noticed it in the way she looked at him, the way she'd touch his arm when they spoke, or how she seemed to light up when he walked into the dealership. She was usually so focused on work, but when Darren was around, she was almost too engaged, laughing, leaning in close, making jokes. I thought I was just being paranoid, that I was reading too much into it. But then, last Thursday, I saw something that changed everything. I was walking out to the parking lot after a long day, about to leave when I saw Tina's car, her black Range Rover, parked next to Darren's Ferrari. The dealership was closed, and there was no reason for either of them to be there. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in my gut. As I stood there, Watching them through the window, I saw Tina laugh and step closer to Darren. And then, for just a moment, their lips brushed together. It was quick, but it was enough. Enough to make my heart drop straight into my stomach. I wasn't sure what I was seeing, but I knew this was more than just a harmless friendship. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about my wife, my business, and my life began to shatter. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't shake the image of Tina and Darren, her lips brushing against his, the way their eyes met in that quiet, secretive moment. It replayed in my mind, over and over, until I felt like I was going crazy. What had I seen? Was I misinterpreting something harmless? But deep down, I knew. I knew what I had witnessed was real. I couldn't confront Tina yet. I wasn't sure how I was going to handle it, or if I should confront her at all. I had to gather my thoughts, figure out what the hell was going on before I made a fool of myself. But every time I looked at her, the uncertainty gnawed at me. I decided to turn my focus back to the dealership for a while. I needed a distraction, and there was always work to do. It was Saturday again, just a week after that night, and the dealership was buzzing with activity. The lot was packed with luxury cars ready to be sold to the next eager buyer. Darren was due to come in that afternoon to look at a new model, something that would suit his growing collection, as he liked to say. As usual, he arrived at exactly 2:30 p.m., sliding out of his silver Audi Q7 with that smooth, almost calculated movement. He looked every bit the successful businessman that he was. Sharp suit, expensive shoes, a look of quiet confidence. "Jake," he called out with that familiar grin, his deep voice rich with the scent of success. "How's everything going? I've been thinking about upgrading. The Ferrari's great, but I need something with a bit more flair, you know?" I didn't miss the way his gaze flicked over to Tina, who was standing by the reception desk, her eyes lighting up the moment he stepped through the door. My stomach twisted again. "Of course, Darren," I said, pushing back my unease. "I've got just the thing in mind. Follow me." We walked through the showroom, and I showed him a brand new 2021 Lamborghini Huracan Evio, the perfect combination of power and elegance. The car practically begged to be driven fast, and I knew it would make Darren's collection even more impressive. But as we talked, Tina slipped into the room, making her way over to Darren with that smile of hers. I caught the briefest glance between them, something that passed between them in a shared, private moment, an inside joke, a flicker of something more. It was subtle, but it was there. It felt like a slap to my face, even though I hadn't caught them in anything outright. "Darren, you've got a great eye," Tina said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear as she leaned in to examine the Lamborghini. "This would look amazing in your garage, don't you think?" I couldn't tear my eyes away from them, and it was clear they were both oblivious to my discomfort. Darren made a joke about getting it in the brightest shade of yellow, and Tina laughed, her voice soft but genuine. Too genuine. It should have been a normal conversation, but to me, it felt like everything had shifted. Like I was watching my wife flirt with one of my best customers right in front of me, and I couldn't do anything about it. I excused myself to deal with a call from a potential buyer, but as I walked away, I heard Tina laugh again. That laugh. I hated it. When I returned, Darren had made up his mind. "I'll take it," he said, without hesitation, handing over his credit card. As I processed the transaction, Tina stepped away to check on another client, but not before giving Darren a lingering look that made my skin crawl. I swallowed the lump in my throat and plastered a smile on my face. This wasn't the time to lose control. "You've got great taste," I said, handing Darren the keys to his new Lamborghini. "Thanks, Jake. You know I trust you with everything. Let me know if you've got any other models in mind for me in the future. I'll be around." I nodded and watched him walk out. The air felt heavy, and my thoughts were racing. Was I imagining things? Or was something really going on between Darren and Tina? After Darren left, I grabbed my jacket and went out for a smoke. I needed to clear my head, needed to figure out what the hell was happening. I was just about to light the cigarette when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Tina. "Let's meet for dinner tonight. I think we need to talk." My stomach flipped again. That was it. That was the moment I'd been dreading. The moment everything would come to a head. I could already feel the confrontation hanging in the air. I didn't know what she was going to say, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. I had to prepare myself for whatever was coming. The worst part? I couldn't stop thinking about Darren. What had I missed? Was it all just in my head? Or had I been so blinded by trust that I couldn't see what was right in front of me? I glanced over at the showroom, the Lamborghini sitting there like a symbol of everything that was slipping through my fingers. If I'd known then what I knew now, I wouldn't have been so quick to dismiss the signs. I would have seen the truth before it shattered everything I thought I knew. But now, it was too late to ignore. The truth was coming for me, and there was no turning back. The evening dragged on in a haze of anticipation. I knew what was coming. That text from Tina. It had been enough to twist my gut into a knot. Let's meet for dinner tonight. I think we need to talk. I read it over and over, the words looping in my mind like a broken record. I had a feeling this was the conversation I'd been dreading, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I had to hear her out. But after everything, after what I saw with Darren, the subtle but unmistakable hints in the way Tina had been acting, I had a sinking feeling that dinner would be more than just a conversation about our relationship. I picked her up at our house at 7:30 p.m. Tina was dressed in a simple black dress, her hair falling in waves over her shoulders. She looked beautiful as always. But tonight, there was something else. Something I couldn't quite place. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze darted toward the ground before she quickly looked up again, like she was trying to read me, trying to figure out what I already knew. I didn't speak as we got in the car. There was nothing to say. I drove in silence, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. We went to Mastro's Steakhouse, the same restaurant we'd gone to for every anniversary, every special occasion. It was a place I'd always thought of as ours, a place where we'd celebrated our life together. But tonight, it felt like a cold, unfamiliar space. As we sat down, Tina started fiddling with the napkin on her lap, her fingers nervous. She wasn't usually this anxious, not unless something was really off. I could feel her discomfort, like the entire restaurant was pressing in on us. The waiter came to take our drink orders, and we both ordered glasses of wine. I wasn't in the mood for food. I wasn't in the mood for anything. So, what did you want to talk about? I finally asked, breaking the silence. My voice was steady, but I could hear the edge underneath it. I couldn't help it. Tina took a deep breath, looking at me for a moment before speaking. Jake, I don't know how to say this, but I've been feeling something for a while now, and I don't know how to fix it. I think we've drifted apart. I blinked, trying to process what she said. Drifted apart? That was the last thing I'd been expecting. We hadn't drifted apart. We'd been building a life together, a business, a home. We had our routine, our normal. What are you talking about? I asked, leaning forward, my heart pounding. Tina, we've been fine, haven't we? Her face tightened, her lips pressed together as if she were holding back something bigger. I could see the struggle in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak again, but I cut her off, unable to hold back anymore. I saw you, I said, my voice quieter but sharper now. I saw you and Darren. Her eyes went wide, and she recoiled slightly as if I'd slapped her. What? What do you mean, you saw us? I was done holding back. I saw you with him. The other night at the dealership. You two, together. Don't lie to me, Tina. I could feel the words hanging in the air, thick with accusation. My heart was racing, and I had no idea what was going to happen next. For a long moment, Tina just sat there, frozen. The color drained from her face, and for the first time in years, I saw something other than the confident, collected woman I'd married. She was terrified. Jake, it's not what you think, she started, her voice shaky. Not what I think. I couldn't believe it. The anger that had been simmering in me for days finally boiled over. Then what is it, Tina? Because what I saw was you and Darren, laughing, touching, like something was going on between you two. Tina closed her eyes, like she was gathering her thoughts, and then she exhaled slowly, her shoulders slumping. I didn't want you to find out this way, she whispered. I leaned in, my voice low. Then how did you think I'd find out? You thought I wouldn't notice the way you act around him? The way you two have been, I don't know, too comfortable with each other? Tina's eyes filled with tears. Jake, God, I never wanted to hurt you. She put a hand on mine, but I pulled away before she could touch me. The gesture only made everything worse. Then tell me the truth, Tina, I demanded. Tell me what's been going on. She looked around, then leaned in, lowering her voice. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. I've been seeing Darren for the past 3 months. We've been together. I felt like the floor had fallen out from under me. My chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe. 3 months? 3 months of betrayal right under my nose? I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to feel. I wanted to yell, to scream, to throw something. But all I could do was stare at her, my mouth dry, my mind racing. Tina was crying now, wiping her eyes with a napkin. She looked so fragile, so small. I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you, but it just happened. Darren made me feel alive again. You've been so focused on the business, and I've been so lonely. I never meant for any of this to happen. Lonely. That was her excuse? I felt like someone had hit me with a brick. All the sleepless nights, all the hours I put into the dealership, all the effort I'd given her. And she'd been sleeping with someone else, someone who wasn't me. I pushed my chair back, the screech of the legs against the tile cutting through the thick air between us. I can't do this, I muttered. Standing up, I can't just sit here and pretend everything's fine. I didn't look at her again. I couldn't. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my jacket, my head spinning. I left the restaurant without another word. And as I walked out into the night, the weight of everything hit me all at once. Tina had betrayed me. Darren had betrayed me. And everything I thought I knew about my life, about who I was, had just crumbled to dust. The night air was heavy with heat, the kind that clung to your skin and made it hard to breathe. I walked aimlessly down the deserted street outside Mastro's, my hands shoved deep in my pockets. I couldn't think. I couldn't process what Tina had just told me. She'd been seeing Darren for 3 months. 3 months, and I had no idea. How could I not have known? I felt like I was drowning in betrayal, and every breath felt like a struggle. I didn't want to go back to the house. Not yet. Not when everything I'd known about my life felt like it had just been torn apart. So, I got in my car, started the engine, and drove. I didn't have a destination in mind, but I needed to be alone. I needed to clear my head, or at least pretend like I could. I drove out to Camelback Mountain, one of my favorite spots in the city to just sit and think. The view of Scottsdale below was breathtaking, especially at night when the city lights twinkled like a sea of stars. But tonight, the beauty of it only deepened the ache in my chest. I sat in my car, parked at the edge of a cliff, staring into the abyss. My mind was a mess of questions, but the answer was always the same. How did I miss this? I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the messages, the texts I'd exchanged with Tina over the past few months. There were no clues, no signs of what was really going on. I kept thinking back to the little things, the way she'd started pulling away from me, how she was always so busy with work, how she kept dodging my questions about where she'd been. Had I ignored it all? Was I so wrapped up in my business that I couldn't see the cracks forming in our marriage? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I hadn't even noticed Darren. I hadn't even questioned why a regular customer, a guy who barely knew Tina beyond buying cars, was spending so much time with her. I trusted him. I trusted both of them. After an hour of staring into the void, I started the engine again and drove home. I didn't want to go inside. I wasn't ready to face Tina, but I had to. I couldn't keep running from this, no matter how much I wanted to. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Tina's car was parked in the garage, and I could see the soft glow of light coming from the living room window. I stood in the driveway for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. This was it. I was about to confront the woman I thought I knew. I stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind me. Tina was sitting on the couch, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, trying to find the words. But I couldn't. How could I explain the whirlwind of emotions I was feeling? The rage, the hurt, the confusion? Tina stood up slowly, wringing her hands together, her voice trembling. Jake, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I shook my head, holding up a hand to stop her. Sorry? You're sorry? I laughed bitterly, though there was nothing funny about this. You think that's enough? You think sorry fixes this? Tina took a step toward me, her eyes wide. Jake, please, just let me explain. It's not what you think. I never wanted to hurt you. You have to understand, Darren. He made me feel special again. I've been feeling so empty, so alone. You were always so focused on the dealership, on the business, and I... Don't give me that, I interrupted, my voice rising. I work my ass off to provide for us. I've been building this business for 7 years, and you think I've just been ignoring you? What about us? What about our marriage? You think running around behind my back with some guy I trust is the answer? She flinched, but I wasn't done. I couldn't stop now. 3 months, Tina. 3 months you've been seeing him. You think I didn't notice? You think I didn't see the way you two looked at each other? You think I didn't know something was wrong? I never meant to hurt you like this, she said again, her voice breaking. She was crying now, and it made my anger surge even higher. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to deal with all of it. How did you think this would end? I demanded, taking a step forward. Did you think I'd just forgive you? That you could play me for a fool and everything would be okay? Tina sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Jake, please. I don't know what happened. I didn't want this to spiral out of control. I never wanted to hurt you. The hurt, the anger, the shock. It all hit me at once, and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think straight. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I couldn't stay here. Not in this house, not with her. The trust was gone. The love was gone. I need space, I said, the words coming out hoarse. I can't be here right now. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with any of this. I turned to leave, but Tina reached out, grabbing my arm. Jake, please, don't go. Let's talk this through. Let me make this right. I pulled my arm away, my heart pounding in my chest. You can't make it right. You can't fix this. I walked out the door and slammed it behind me. My feet carried me to the car before I even realized where I was going. My mind was a blur, but all I knew was that I had to get away from her, from this life we'd built together. It didn't matter where I went. I just couldn't stay in that house, in that town, in that life anymore. I drove through the night, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, memories of Tina, of Darren, of everything that had come crashing down. I had trusted them both, and now, all I had was this hollow feeling in my chest, like a hole that nothing could fill. The betrayal had already started to destroy me, and I wasn't sure if there was any way back from this. I spent the next few days in a haze of confusion and anger. After leaving the house that night, I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what to do with myself. My entire life felt like it had been flipped upside down, and I was too disoriented to figure out what came next. I didn't want to go back to the dealership. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to face anyone, least of all Tina. I stayed at a hotel for 2 nights, just far enough away from everything to breathe. But the more I tried to clear my head, the more I found myself sinking deeper into this gnawing feeling of betrayal. The anger still bubbled inside me, but now there was something else, a sense of helplessness. I couldn't change what had happened, and I couldn't stop what was already unraveling. On the 3rd day, I finally decided I needed to go back to the dealership. I couldn't keep running. I couldn't hide from the reality that had taken root in my life. I needed to face the truth, even if it was too painful to bear. When I walked into the showroom that afternoon, I was met with the usual hum of activity. The air smelled like fresh leather, and the lights gleamed off the polished chrome of the cars. It felt normal, too normal. The fact that the world kept spinning while my life had come to a screeching halt made me feel disconnected from everything. I didn't even notice him at first. It wasn't until I was halfway across the room that I saw Darren standing by a row of Ferraris, talking to one of my salesmen. He was leaning against the red Ferrari 488 Pista, his hands in his pockets, looking every bit the confident, smug bastard he was. At first, I froze. I didn't know what to do. My instinct was to turn around and walk out, but my legs felt like lead. I hadn't seen him since the night I found out about him and Tina, and in that moment, I realized I was more angry with him than I had been with her. He was the one who had taken my wife, the one who'd crossed a line I thought was unspoken. He knew I trusted him. He knew everything. And he still chose to go behind my back. But then he turned, and our eyes locked. For a moment, neither of us moved. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes, something almost like regret or maybe guilt. But I didn't want to read into it. I didn't care. He walked toward me, slow and steady, like he wasn't quite sure how to approach me. He extended his hand, but I didn't shake it. I just stood there, staring him down. "Jake," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "Can we talk?" I didn't speak at first. The anger inside me surged, and for a second, I thought I might just throw a punch and be done with it. But I held it in. Barely. Talk? About what? My voice was tight, controlled, but my fists were clenched at my sides. About how you've been sleeping with my wife for the last 3 months. Or about how you've been playing me for a fool. He looked like he'd been slapped. There was a flash of guilt across his face, but it was quickly replaced with something else. Defensiveness, maybe, or frustration. "I didn't want this, Jake. I never meant to hurt you. It wasn't supposed to go this far." "Yeah? And how far were you planning to take it? How long were you going to keep this secret from me?" I stepped closer, my voice rising. "You think I wouldn't find out? You think I wouldn't notice the way you two were acting around each other? You think I'm stupid?" Darren's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. "I wasn't trying to make it complicated. It just happened, man. I didn't come into this wanting to hurt you, but you did." I shouted. "You betrayed me. You betrayed everything we had." He was silent for a moment, and then his gaze softened. "I'm sorry, Jake. I never meant to get involved with Tina. Not like this. But I'm not the only one to blame here." I blinked, taken aback. "What the hell does that mean?" Darren took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I've been talking to Tina a lot, but she wasn't the only one looking for something more. You've been distant, Jake. You've been consumed with the business. You've been pushing her away without even realizing it." I felt like I'd been hit in the gut. I stepped back, shaking my head. "That's your excuse? Because I've been busy with my work, that makes it okay for you to sleep with my wife?" "No," he said quickly, his voice almost pleading. "I'm not saying it's okay. I'm just saying it's complicated. Tina was lonely, Jake. You've been so wrapped up in the dealership that she started to feel like she wasn't a part of your life anymore. She needed something, someone, and I was there." I could barely hear him through the ringing in my ears. I wanted to punch him, to scream, but something in his voice, the way he said lonely, the way he seemed genuinely remorseful, stopped me. Was this his attempt at an apology? Did he actually think he had a chance at redeeming himself? The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I wanted to say something. I wanted to yell at him, to demand that he leave and never come back. But then, in a moment of clarity, I realized something. This wasn't just about Darren. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the truth. Yes, Darren had betrayed me, but he wasn't the one who took an oath to love me, to stay faithful. That was Tina. Tina had chosen him. She had made that decision, and she had broken everything between us. Darren might have been the catalyst, but she was the one who had let it go this far. "Get out," I said quietly, the words catching in my throat. "Just get out of my dealership." Darren didn't argue. He just nodded, his expression a mix of regret and guilt, and walked away. As he left, I felt something heavy settle in my chest. This was just the beginning. I hadn't even begun to understand how deep this betrayal ran. The days after Darren's visit felt like a blur. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind, trying to understand what had just happened. The anger still burned, but it was now mixed with something else, a quiet, creeping doubt. Darren had said things that hit harder than I wanted to admit. He'd painted a picture of Tina, of a woman who was lonely, who felt abandoned. It was hard to hear, especially coming from the man who had betrayed me, but there was truth in his words. I had been consumed by my business. I had buried myself in the dealership, in the cars, in the constant hustle to stay on top. I had lost sight of everything else. But that wasn't enough to excuse what had happened. It didn't change the fact that Tina had chosen to betray me. She'd chosen him. I had to remind myself of that, over and over, to keep from falling into the trap of self-blame. She was the one who made the choice. She had crossed the line. Not Darren. Not the business. Her. I spent the next few days alone at the dealership, going through the motions. I threw myself into the work I had left behind, trying to numb the ache in my chest with cars, numbers, and customer complaints. It wasn't a perfect distraction, but it was the only thing that kept me from spiraling. Then came the text. It was from Tina. "Jake, we need to talk. Please." "I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time, the screen almost blurring as my mind raced. Talk? After everything? Was there anything left to say? What could she possibly offer that would make this better? That could fix the mess she'd made? But deep down, I knew what was coming. She wanted to explain herself. She wanted to justify her actions, to offer some kind of reasoning for the affair. And as much as I hated it, I couldn't resist. I had to know. I had to hear her side of the story, even if I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the truth. I agreed to meet her at a cafe near the dealership. It was a place we used to go on lazy afternoons, sipping coffee and pretending that the world wasn't closing in on us. I hadn't been there since everything blew up, but I knew the moment I walked in, it wouldn't feel the same. Tina was already there when I arrived, sitting in the corner by the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. She looked tired, more than I'd ever seen her. There were dark circles under her eyes, her hair disheveled as if she hadn't bothered with it. She looked broken. It almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. When she saw me, she stood up quickly, as though she was afraid I would leave before she could speak. "Jake," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Thank you for coming. I know you don't want to be here, but I need to explain." I didn't say anything. I just sat down, feeling the weight of the silence between us. The words I wanted to say were stuck in my throat, but I knew I had to let her talk. I had to hear her say it. "I'm so sorry," Tina began, her voice shaky. "I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for. I've been selfish, Jake. I was lonely, and when Darren came into my life, he made me feel seen again. He made me feel like I wasn't just some afterthought. You've been so wrapped up in the dealership, and I don't blame you for it. But I needed someone. I needed him." I clenched my fists, the urge to get up and walk out burning through me. She was saying all the right words, the same things she had said when we were first dating. The same lines about how much she loved me, how important I was to her. But now, it felt hollow. Empty. "I'm sorry, Jake. I know that doesn't make up for what I've done," she continued, her voice breaking. "But please understand. This wasn't about you not loving me. It was about me feeling lost. I was lost, Jake. And Darren. He made me feel found." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "So, that's it? You just let it happen? You let him into our lives, into our marriage, because you felt lost?" The words were coming out now, and I couldn't stop them. "What about us, Tina? What about our vows? What about the promises we made to each other? Did they mean nothing?" Tina looked down, her eyes welling up with tears. "No, Jake, they meant everything. They still do. But I was selfish. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about how much I was risking. And I never wanted to hurt you. I swear I didn't." I shook my head, feeling the anger boil inside me again. "Well, you did. You hurt me. You betrayed me in the worst way possible." She took a deep breath, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I know I did. And I don't know how to make it right. But I'm willing to try, Jake. I'm willing to fight for us if you'll let me. Please don't give up on me." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since this whole mess started. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, was sitting across from me, broken and pleading for forgiveness. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about trust. About everything I thought I knew crumbling before my eyes. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, the words heavy in my chest. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And I don't know if I even want to try." Tina's face crumpled, her hand reaching out across the table, but I didn't take it. I couldn't. Not yet. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, she whispered. But please, let's figure this out together. I'll do whatever it takes. I sat there for a long time, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't control. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to take her hand, tell her everything would be okay, and pretend that we could go back to how things were. But I knew better. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was real life. And real life didn't come with easy answers. I stood up abruptly, and Tina's eyes followed me, panic flashing across her face. But I couldn't sit there any longer. I need time, I said, my voice cold. I need time to think. And with that, I walked out, leaving her behind in the cafe that had once been ours. I didn't sleep much that night. The hours dragged on, and my mind spun in 1,000 directions. Tina's words, her desperate plea for forgiveness, kept replaying over and over. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she was sorry, that she truly regretted what she'd done. But the truth was, I didn't know who she was anymore. The woman I had married, the woman I had trusted with everything, wasn't the same person sitting across from me in that cafe. That woman had betrayed me in ways I couldn't even begin to process. As much as I wanted to pretend everything was fine, that we could fix this, I knew deep down that things would never be the same. But the next morning, Tina showed up at the dealership. I hadn't been expecting it. I was standing by a row of Lamborghinis, checking the inventory, when I saw her car pull into the lot. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But no, there she was, her black Range Rover, parked just outside the showroom doors. My stomach twisted. She was standing by the front of the dealership when I walked out, her hands clasped tightly together. She looked different. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. I knew that look. It was the look of someone who knew they had fucked up beyond repair. "Jake," she said softly, her voice shaky. "Can we talk?" I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to be near her. But there she was, standing in front of me, and I couldn't avoid it any longer. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Let's go inside," I said flatly, already turning to walk toward the office. I didn't want to be out in the open, surrounded by customers, but I didn't want her to think I was avoiding her either. She followed me inside, the door clicking shut behind us. The silence between us felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. We both knew that this conversation would decide everything. I sat behind my desk and gestured for her to sit. She didn't. She just stood there, wringing her hands. I could see the nervous energy radiating off her, the way she kept glancing at me, as if trying to gauge what I was thinking. But I didn't give her anything. I didn't want to. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, Tina began, her voice barely above a whisper. And I know I've hurt you beyond measure. I can't take back what I've done, Jake. But I want you to know, I never wanted to destroy us. I never wanted to destroy what we had. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. You didn't just hurt me, Tina. You didn't just destroy us. You've destroyed everything I thought I knew about you. About myself. About what we had. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Tina flinched at my tone, but she didn't back down. "I understand that," she said, her eyes pleading with me. "But I swear, it wasn't about not loving you. It was about me not feeling like me anymore. I didn't know who I was, Jake. I didn't know how to deal with the way I was feeling." I shook my head. "That's your problem, Tina. You're right. You didn't know who you were, but that's not my fault. I didn't ask you to get lost. And I sure as hell didn't ask you to betray me." Her eyes welled with tears again, but I didn't feel sympathy this time. I couldn't. All I could feel was the cold, bitter sting of betrayal. "I was lonely," she whispered, her voice cracking. "And when Darren came into my life, he made me feel seen again. He made me feel important. I know it was wrong. I know it was a mistake. But I can't undo what happened." There it was again, the same excuses, the same words she had used the other night. I had been expecting them, but hearing them again only made me angrier. She kept painting herself as a victim, as though Darren was some kind of savior. But the truth was, she was the one who chose to cross the line. She was the one who betrayed me. And it wasn't just with Darren. It was with her own self-doubt, her own insecurities. I stood up suddenly, the chair scraping against the floor. You keep talking about how you felt, how you were lonely. But what about me, Tina? What about the guy who worked his ass off to build this business, to provide for you, to give you everything you wanted? What about the guy who trusted you, who believed in us? Was that worth anything? Her tears spilled over now, and she took a step forward, reaching out toward me. Jake, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to lose you. I don't know how to make it right, but I want to try. Please, please, let me make it right. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the wave of emotion that was threatening to break through. For the first time, I let myself feel what I had been too afraid to face. I had to admit it to myself. I couldn't trust her anymore. The foundation of our marriage, the bond we had built, had been shattered, and I didn't know if it could be repaired. I don't know if I can do that, I said quietly, the words tasting like acid. I don't know if I can forgive you, and I don't know if I even want to try. You made your choice, Tina. You chose Darren. And now I have to choose for myself? I can't live in the shadow of what you did. Her face crumpled, and she sank into the chair, her hands over her face. Jake, please, don't give up on us. But I already had. I turned and walked out of the office without another word. The days after I walked out of that office were the hardest of my life. Every morning, I woke up with this crushing emptiness in my chest, a weight I couldn't escape. There were no simple answers, no easy way out. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was different now, more like a dull ache that wouldn't go away. It was a kind of grief I hadn't expected, the kind that hits you when you realize that everything you built, everything you believed in, is gone, and it's gone forever. I didn't go back to the dealership for the first 2 days. I couldn't. Every time I thought about walking in there, seeing Tina's face, seeing Darren's smug grin as he drove off in his shiny new toys, it felt like I was suffocating. But life doesn't stop just because your heart breaks. Business doesn't pause. So I went back. I had no choice. The moment I stepped into the dealership, I felt like an outsider in my own life. The showroom, the cars, the hustle, it was all the same, but I wasn't. I was different. I wasn't the same man who had walked in and out of that place 1,000 times before. The man who smiled at customers, who worked late into the night, who thought his world was unshakable. That man was gone. I walked to my office, the place where I used to feel like I was in control. But now, the weight of the decision I had made the other day hung over me. Could I really walk away from everything? Could I walk away from Tina, from the life we had built, from the future I thought we were supposed to share? But then I thought about that night, that last conversation, and how she begged me to forgive her. I thought about the way she tried to justify everything, tried to explain away her choices with excuses and tears. And I thought about how, in the end, I couldn't forgive her. Not because I didn't love her, but because she had shattered the trust between us. And without trust, there's nothing. I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out the picture of us from our honeymoon. We were in Santorini, laughing at something silly, sitting on a sun-soaked terrace overlooking the blue waters. We looked so happy. We looked like we were meant to be together forever. But that was before. That was before I knew the truth. That was before I learned how fragile everything could be. I ran my fingers over the photo, feeling the cool edge of the frame against my skin. I loved her. I still loved her. But love wasn't enough. Love didn't fix what had been broken. Love didn't undo the hurt. Love didn't erase the betrayal. And that's when I realized that I had to choose myself. I wasn't going to waste my life living in the shadow of someone else's choices. I wasn't going to destroy myself trying to hold on to something that was never going to be the same. I couldn't keep pretending everything would be okay if I just ignored the truth. The truth was, Tina and I weren't the same people anymore. We had both changed. She had changed. And now, it was my turn to change. The door to my office opened. It was Ava, one of my longtime employees, the one who kept the business running smoothly when I couldn't focus. She had been with me from the beginning, and I could see in her eyes that she knew something was off. "You okay?" she asked softly, standing in the doorway. "You've been distant. Not your usual self." I looked up at her, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of clarity. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, but I could tell Ava saw right through me. She knew what had happened, and she wasn't here to judge. I'm fine, I said, even though I wasn't. Just figuring things out. She gave me a nod, her expression sympathetic but not overbearing. If you need to talk, you know where to find me. Thanks, Ava, I said, offering a small, tired smile. It was the first smile I'd given in days. After she left, I sat back in my chair, staring at the picture again. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel defeated. I just felt tired. Tired of holding on to something that was never meant to last. I picked up the phone and called Tina. I knew what I had to do. The silence stretched between us on the line when she answered, and for a moment, I thought she might just hang up. But she didn't. Jake, she said quietly, her voice raw, I'm so sorry. I know you don't want to hear from me. I understand if you never want to speak to me again. But I just need you to know that I never stopped loving you. I closed my eyes, the weight of her words heavy in my chest. I know you loved me, Tina, I said softly, but you betrayed me. And that's something I can't just forget. There was a long pause, and I could hear her trying to hold back her tears. But I wasn't going to let myself be pulled back into her world of broken promises and shattered trust. I don't know what happens next, I continued, but I know this isn't it. We're not the same. I'm not the same, and I need to move on. I understand, she whispered, and with that, I hung up the phone. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel closure, but I knew that I had made the right choice for me. It was time to move forward, even if I didn't know what that looked like yet. I had lost a part of myself in this mess, but I was going to find a way to rebuild. I walked outside into the Arizona heat, the sun blazing overhead. The world didn't stop for me, and I couldn't stop for it. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this. I was going to be okay. I had to be. And with that, I stepped forward into the unknown, ready to leave the past behind.